The Dream Team and the Redeem Team, the two greatest basketball teams ever assembled. Both teams were loaded with Hall of Famers and driven with motivation. When the 1992 Dream Team was assembled, it marked the first time in U.S. Olympic history that the USA team would be represented by NBA players. They were coming off of the 1988 Olympics, in which the USA team only managed a bronze medal. The new professional Olympians were ready to dominate the rest of the world as basically the Avengers of the basketball universe, and dominate is exactly what they did. On their way to the gold medal, the US crushed every single opponent by at least 32 points. At the time, they were without question the greatest basketball team ever assembled. As the years have gone on, the game has become an obsession on a more global scale, and the rest of the world has been improving on its abilities. This was never more evident than in the 2004 Olympics, when the USA men's basketball team only managed a bronze medal as Argentina secured the gold. This motivated the men's US program to have a new level of focus and determination heading into the 2008 Olympics. Coach Mike Krzyzewski stepped in, and the world's best players joined together to form the Redeem Team. The Redeem Team steamrolled the competition on their way to the gold, winning their games by an average disparity of 28 points. Both USA teams destroyed the competition, and never before or since has there been teams assembled as powerful as these two squads. On the Dream Team was Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Scottie Pippen, Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullin, Karl Malone, and John Stockton. Technically, Christian Laettner was on the team too, but he won't be much of a determining factor. On the Redeem Team was Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, Dwight Howard, Chris Bosh, Jason Kidd, Chris Paul, Carlos Boozer, Deron Williams, Tayshaun Prince, and Michael Redd. Mike Gorzemba did his own video on this comparison, but in it, he let the NBA 2K simulation be the determining factor. In this video, I'll be taking more of an analytical approach, and by the end of this, we'll determine who would win this matchup. We'll be looking at all kinds of different factors, from how the international game is played to the different matchups on the floor. So without any further ado, let's get into it. First off, let's take a look at the talent at the very top of the roster for both teams, starting with the three best players. The Dream Team is obviously loaded with talent and all-time greats, but when you think about the best they have to offer, three players come to mind: Michael, Magic, and Larry. These three were responsible for carrying the NBA throughout the 80s and 90s, and each one of these guys are easily in the top 10 greatest players of all time. With all of that being said, timing is a huge factor in this comparison. At the time the Dream Team was assembled, these three players were not all in the prime of their careers. Sure, Michael Jordan was a back-to-back NBA champion. He was arguably the best player on both sides of the ball, and was in the middle of building his argument as the greatest player of all time. Magic and Larry, on the other hand, were completely different stories. Magic Johnson had already retired from the NBA due to his HIV announcement, and had previously missed an entire season of basketball before lacing them up again for the '92 Olympics. Although this Magic Johnson was still solid, this wasn't the prime shape Magic Johnson of the mid-'80s who was winning championships and MVP awards. Larry was in a much worse state. Bird, along with Magic, had also retired from the NBA and was 35 years old at the time, dealing with severe and chronic back problems. You could often find Larry laying courtside to deal with the back pain. He played in very limited minutes throughout the Olympic Games, and the only players he outscored were the two pass-first point guards, Magic Johnson and John Stockton, and of course the college kid, Christian Laettner, who honestly didn't do much of anything for the Dream Team. So essentially you had a prime Michael Jordan, a Magic Johnson a little beyond his years, and a Larry Bird who was a complete shell of what he once was. Now compare that to the three best players of the Redeem Team: Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and Dwayne Wade. Kobe was at the height of his powers, coming off of an MVP season and a trip to the finals in which he had recently lost to the Boston Celtics. This was one of the most competitively driven and motivated version of Kobe the league had seen, and players testified that it showed in his workouts and preparations for those summer games. LeBron was still young and maturing, but athletically speaking, this was the prime of his career. Dwayne Wade was also in his prime and actually led the entire Redeem Team in scoring over the summer games. All three of these legends were in their mid to late 20s, which is a stark contrast from the Dream Team's stars. The greatest and glaring mismatch would be at the small forward position. A quick, strong, and physically primed 24-year-old LeBron James would be a near impossible task for the back injury-laden 35-year-old Larry Bird to handle. In Larry Bird's prime, he was a good defender, but the 1992 version of Bird was far from his prime form. Larry would be slow defensively during their games and would spend a majority of the match laying on the sideline to deal with the back pain. To put it simply, LeBron would have an absolute feast in this contest whenever Larry was on the floor across from him. Regardless of Jordan's greatness, the edge in this aspect goes to the Redeem Team. As you go deeper into the rosters, you begin to notice an advantage for the Dream Team, and that's the big men. Sure, the Redeem Team has Dwight Howard, who is at the height of his powers as well. He was a top 5 player in the league at this point, and he was an anchor defensively, but with that being said, he doesn't have much help in the paint with only Chris Bosh and Carlos Boozer to back him up. And he'll have the responsibility of containing David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, and Charles Barkley. That's just too much firepower in the paint and in the post for the Dream Team to not give them an overwhelming advantage in this area. Dwight will do the best he can do to contest shots and handle all that physicality down low, but those Dream Team players are some of the greatest centers and power forwards in NBA history who were accustomed to bullying opponents around with their strength and physicality, and they'll be owning the rebounding battle as well. Speaking of physicality, this is an area where the international game is quite different from the NBA style of play and officiating. Teams are allowed to play a more physical style of basketball in international basketball. The refereeing is just far more lenient. More contact is allowed and less reach-in fouls are called. Notably, this was a particular advantage that Kobe Bryant used in the 2008 Olympic Games. Kobe took on the assignment of guarding the opposing best player night in and night out, and he was clearly a frustration to opposing players with his new level of physical intensity being permitted. So since Kobe used this to his advantage, you might think that this is an advantage that works towards the benefit of the Redeem Team, but I actually think this physicality would more strongly benefit the '92 Dream Team. Jordan and Pippen are two of the greatest wing defenders in NBA history. With their strength, length, and giant hands, they would cause all kinds of problems for the Redeem Team. John Stockton was a feisty defensive point guard as well, who is also the all-time leader in steals. He would greatly benefit from the more lenient play as well. Obviously, the Redeem Team could also ramp up their defensive intensity too, but with Jordan and Pippen already suffocating you defensively, the last thing they need is more leniency to rough you up on the perimeter. This is an aspect and advantage that's in favor of the Dream Team. On the other side of the spectrum from the physicality is the perimeter shooting and the three-point revolution that's taken the NBA by storm. The 2008 team was better at the three ball, which matters significantly, especially when you consider that the three-point line is closer in international play. In the Olympic Games, the three-point line is only 20 feet 6 inches away from the basket. That's closer to college ball distance than the NBA. The NBA is at 22 feet on the corners and 23 feet 9 inches from the top of the arc. The long, inefficient two-point shots are now just close three-pointers in the Olympics, which is why guys like Carmelo Anthony, who aren't typically great three-point shooters, suddenly look like some of the greatest three-point shooters ever in the Olympics. Kobe also becomes a fantastic three-point shooter since he too is a lover of the long two-point jumpers. With shooters like Melo, Kobe, Chris Paul, Michael Redd, and Deron Williams, the Redeem Team has the advantage in this area, but it's not quite as clear as some of you might initially think. The Dream Team have shooters like Chris Mullin, Clyde Drexler, and Larry Bird. The shorter three-point line also makes Michael Jordan a viable three-point option as well. In the '92 Olympics, Jordan and Mullin together actually shot more three-pointers than the rest of the Dream Team combined. So again, although the Redeem Team has an edge on perimeter shooting, the Dream Team can certainly hang. The last aspect I'll touch on is the overall depth for each team and how the second units match up. Based on health and talent, you're likely looking at a Dream Team starting lineup of Magic, Jordan, Pippen, Barkley, and Robinson going up against Chris Paul, Kobe, LeBron, Carmelo, and Dwight Howard. That's a pretty solid 5-on-5. But once players rest and the rotation players come in, that's where the depth of the Dream Team begins to become overwhelming. The Dream Team's second unit looks like John Stockton, Clyde Drexler, Larry Bird, Karl Malone, and Patrick Ewing. That's their freaking bench mob. That second group has defense, experience, shooting, IQ, and rebounding. They really aren't missing much. They would be up against the second unit of Deron Williams, Dwayne Wade, Tayshaun Prince, Carlos Boozer, and Chris Bosh. Other than Wade and maybe Bosh, this second unit would get absolutely destroyed by the Dream Team's second unit. And when the Redeem Team starters head to the bench, that's when they would start to fall behind. After you consider the main factors, from the star players, the defense, physicality, shooting, and depth, I would pick the Dream Team's 11 Hall of Famers to prevail over the Redeem Team's 8 future Hall of Famers. In a single game, I'm picking them to win in an 8 to 12 point victory, and in a best of 7, I'm taking the Dream Team in 6. Again, I have my analytical notes, but this is all just speculation in my opinion. Who knows, maybe the Redeem Team would surprise me in this hypothetical situation. Let me know in the comments section who you think would win in a 7-game series and how many games it would take.
And I still think Dream Team 2 could beat Dream Team 1, and I don't care who like it.
Okay.
When we think of Team USA basketball, usually a few different squads come to mind. First and foremost is obviously the Dream Team in 1992, which was a collection of some of the greatest basketball players in the history of the game. In total, 12 out of their 13 players went on to be Basketball Hall of Famers. They dominated the competition as they went undefeated throughout the Olympic Games in Barcelona, on their way to the gold medal. Obviously, with such a ridiculously overpowered collection of talent, and given their impact on the game globally, it would make sense that they would overshadow many other USA teams throughout the future of international basketball. And no team was more dramatically overshadowed by their presence than the 1994 USA team, who was also known as Dream Team 2. During the selection process of the 1994 team, the selection committee realized that most of the 92 team's greatest players were no longer available. At the time, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson were all retired from the NBA. With this being the case, the selection committee decided to move in a completely new direction entirely, as they selected a completely brand new group to represent the US for the 1994 World Championship, which was held in Ontario, Canada. The players selected were Shaquille O'Neal, Alonzo Mourning, Reggie Miller, Dominique Wilkins, Mark Price, Shawn Kemp, Larry Johnson, Joe Dumars, Steve Smith, Dan Marley, Kevin Johnson, and Derek Coleman. Isaiah Thomas and Tim Hardaway were also slated to make the team, but because of injuries, they ended up being replaced. Selected to be the coach was the 3-time Coach of the Year winner, and simply one of the greatest coaches in the history of the game, Don Nelson of the Golden State Warriors. Nelson was way ahead of his time in the sense that he coached his teams to be a fast-paced, free-flowing run-and-gun offense that emphasized transition play and three-point shooting. In a way, you could say that he was the more successful prototype to Mike D'Antoni. His style blended beautifully with this youthful group of superstars. It came as no surprise that this sequel to the Dream Team also dominated the international competition to a historic extent. Floor generals like Mark Price and Kevin Johnson were completely thrilled to push the tempo. Shaq, Mourning, Coleman, and Kemp were a rotation of athletic bigs in their 20s, who had no problems keeping up with the transition style, and they were often the recipients who were finishing thunderously on the offensive end. Larry Johnson and Dominique Wilkins were also powerful slashers and finishers, who provided plenty of show-stopping highlights. Then you had guys like Reggie Miller, Steve Smith, Dan Marley, and Joe Dumars, who not only locked down the perimeter defensively, but offensively, they were some of the most deadly perimeter shooters that the game had to offer. In truth, this team had it all, and there was basically nothing the rest of the world could do to slow them down. Just like the first Dream Team before them, Dream Team 2 went undefeated throughout the championship games, as they defeated opposing teams with an average margin of victory of 37.8 points, which was only 5 points behind the average margin of victory of the 1992 squad. Again, the fact that this didn't take place during Olympic competition, and the fact that Magic, Bird, and Michael Jordan stole the show just 2 years prior is probably among the major reasons why no one talks about Dream Team 2 anymore 3 decades later. With that being said, there is no question that this was one of the strongest, most cohesive, and well-rounded USA teams that the game of basketball has ever seen. Today, I wanted to take a moment to remember one of the greatest USA teams of all time. They're a dominant gold medal team, but yet they're very overlooked historically. So the question then becomes, why is the 1996 USA team so overlooked? Well, simply put, the 1992 Dream Team takes all of the attention and dominates the debates and conversation, which is understandable to an extent, because when you have a team headlined with names like Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird, naturally they'll be the team that everyone wants to talk about when we reflect on Olympic history. With that being said, although the Dream Team has some of the greatest names from a basketball fame standpoint, I could certainly argue that the 96 team was the deeper team from top to bottom. I know it sounds crazy, but listen to the guys on the 96 team. The starters were Gary Payton at the point, Reggie Miller at the 2 guard, Grant Hill at small forward, Charles Barkley at power forward, and Hakeem Olajuwon was leading at center. Then you have the bench of Karl Malone, John Stockton, Penny Hardaway, Shaquille O'Neal, Scottie Pippen, Mitch Richmond, and David Robinson. Absolute studs all over the roster, and there isn't even a single Christian Laettner in sight to weigh them down. This squad, just like the other great USA teams, dominated the rest of the world with a perfect 8-0 record on their way to the gold medal. Charles Barkley was still dominant and led this team in scoring, just like he did in 1992 as well. Pretty much every crucial aspect of team basketball, this 96 team had covered. The most standout, obvious area of excellence on this team was the center position, which I can say, with complete confidence, was the strongest rotation at the center position there has ever been in any form of basketball. Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal, and David Robinson. Whichever of these 3 guys you choose to be relegated to the 3rd string, in all likelihood, instantly becomes the greatest 3rd stringer of all time. Hakeem Olajuwon was 1 year removed from being back-to-back Finals MVP winner. David Robinson was 1 year removed from being the league's MVP, and Shaquille O'Neal was quickly approaching his prime years as he was just about to start his career with the Lakers. Yeah, good luck with that lineup, Croatia. 3-point shooting was another area where they stood out. Unsurprisingly, Reggie Miller was the leader in 3-point attempts as he shot a tremendous 41.5% over the Olympics. Mitch Richmond was low-key one of the greatest 3-point shooters as well. He was second in attempts as he shot 42.3% from that distance. Along with those 2 all-time great shooters, you also had other guys who were pretty good at the long ball, like Penny Hardaway, John Stockton, and even Scottie Pippen. Speaking of Scottie Pippen and the perimeter game, the 96 USA team was torching opponents from that distance on offense, but they were also shutting them down on defense, because Scottie Pippen was one of the greatest defensive players of all time, and he was coming off of the Bulls' 72-10 championship season where he made first team all-defense. Shutting down the point guards was Gary Payton, who was known as the Glove for his incredible defense as he was in the prime of his career and was the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. If somehow the opposing wings were able to get past this perimeter defense, they were meeting either Shaq, Hakeem, or Robinson at the rim. Kind of a nightmare situation for the rest of the world. Over the next 2 seasons after these Olympics, the NBA Finals would be represented by the dynamic duo of John Stockton and Karl Malone. But in these summer games, they were simply coming off the bench and would be pick and rolling opposing countries all night long. Then there's a couple players who really add to the greatness of this squad, but can easily be overlooked or written off as well, especially by younger basketball fans, and that's Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. To really appreciate these guys, you need to understand how good they were in 1996 before injuries disrupted their careers. This same year, Michael Jordan was asked in an interview who he saw as the next Michael Jordan, the guy he would pass the torch to when he does inevitably retire. Michael said 2 players, Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. That alone should tell you that these guys were extra level special. Grant was a 6'8" small forward who was having an all-around, statistically monstrous start to the beginning of his career, similar to the beginnings of Oscar Robertson and Larry Bird. He could handle the ball, he could facilitate, he could rebound, and he could score with the best of them. And then there's Penny, who was a large 6'7" point guard who was often compared more to Magic Johnson than Michael Jordan. He was young, athletic, a great passer, and a 20 points per game scorer. Looking at the results of this group and the talent of the roster from top to bottom, I think you could argue that this was the greatest team of all time if just one aspect had been different: the absence of Michael Jordan. That's it. That's the difference for most people who recognize the 92 team as the ultimate dream team. If Jordan had been on the 96 team, in my opinion, that would have been the greatest team of all time. I understand there's other differences between the two squads, like how Larry and Magic played on the 92 team in Barcelona. I won't try to downplay Magic's contribution, who had been out of the NBA for a year at that point due to his HIV retirement. But you could still tell by watching the 92 games that he was still an elite player. Bird, on the other hand, was a different situation. He barely played that many minutes that summer because his back was so jacked up at that point. So despite how great he looks in the team photos, the reality was that he didn't have a major impact on their greatness. So with the major loss of Magic Johnson from the 92 team to the 96 team, you had major additions of Gary Payton's defense and Shaquille O'Neal and Hakeem Olajuwon joining David Robinson down low. That makes up for it in my mind. Plus the 96 team was 12 All-Stars deep instead of 11. Again, if Jordan had played, I think the 96 team would have been the greatest ever. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Do you think this team is the second greatest USA team of all time, and do you agree that if they had Jordan, they would have been the best ever? Happy 4th, everyone! Since 1936, basketball has been an Olympic sport. But for most years of Olympic history, USA basketball was not represented by the country's greatest players, but usually by only the best collegiate players. Well, that was until 1992, when the US recognized that the rest of the world was getting better, and it was time to get serious about securing gold medals. For the first time ever, the US Olympic basketball team would be represented by pro players, and in 1992, they assembled the team that is famously remembered as the Dream Team, 11 Hall of Famers who absolutely destroyed the competition, and the sport was changed forever. So this raises a question. What if the US didn't wait until 1992, and pro players had always represented the United States during the Olympic Games? Which groups would stand out? In this video, I'm going to answer that, but I decided to take it even a step further and ranked both the greatest USA teams and the greatest hypothetical USA teams on one list. Obviously, these are all just my opinion, and I'm not any more qualified to make these decisions than you guys are. So let me know in the comments section how you would rank these hypothetical all-time great USA teams. Also, there's a couple things that I need to make clear before we get into the list. One, although I picked the players who would represent the hypothetical USA teams, we can't possibly be certain that these players would have accepted the invite. Like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, for example, who had the opportunity to represent the US during his college days in 1968, but for personal reasons, he declined in that instance. So when I'm going through the list of the what if USA teams, just remember to consider it with a grain of salt. Second, remember how Christian Laettner was on the 1992 Dream Team even though he was still in college? That's because at the time, the committee was selecting 11 pro players and 1 college player so they could hold on to the collegiate tradition. Well, that didn't last very long, and before you know it, all 12 players were pros on Team USA. Due to this, I will only select 12 pros and no college players to represent each hypothetical team. Seeing that this now puts the Dream Team at a disadvantage, let's go ahead and swap out Christian Laettner for the still dominant Dominique Wilkins. Some would rather have Isaiah Thomas on that Dream Team, but the other players on the team still would not have wanted that, and I would argue at that stage of their career that Dominique Wilkins was more deserving of the 12th spot anyway. The last thing you need to know is that not including the FIBA Championship, there have been a combined 15 real and hypothetical Olympic teams since the 1960s. I'm not going to rank all 15 because I don't want to waste time talking about all the bad teams. So instead, I'm only talking about the 8 greatest USA teams. If you would like to read all my selections of every other team since 1960, you can do so in the pinned comment. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 8, the 1976 team. This unit is absolutely stacked, as it's a powerful combination between NBA players and ABA players. Narrowing this group down to just 12 players was incredibly tough, as there was easily 16 to 18 superstar players during this era. First, your guards are Walt Frazier, Nate Tiny Archibald, Pistol Pete Maravich, and George the Iceman Gervin. The forwards are David Thompson, Julius Erving, Rick Barry, Elvin Hayes, and Bob McAdoo. The centers are Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Dave Cowens, and Artis Gilmore. One thing is for sure, this team would have no issues scoring the basketball, as there are scoring titles all over the roster. This group would have been incredibly fast, and with guys like Pete Maravich, David Thompson, and Rick Barry, they could have done well even in another era that's focused on three-point shooting. Walt Frazier would have had a lot of responsibility to keep this many scoring threats happy with just one basketball, but if anything, that's a pretty good problem to have. Number 7. The 1984 team. The guards are a young Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, George the Iceman Gervin, and the multi-defensive player of the year winner, Sidney Moncrief. The forwards are Larry Bird, Julius Erving, Adrian Dantley, Kevin McHale, and Bill Laimbeer to provide defense and rebounding. At center, you have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Moses Malone, and the Celtics rim protector, Robert Parrish. This would have been another potent offense, but this unit also would have been very formidable defensively, both on the interior and perimeter. Although the '84 team would have certainly dominated, the timing wasn't exactly perfect, as guys like Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and John Stockton would have been eligible candidates if the Olympics had taken place just one season later. Number 6. The 1996 team, also commonly referred to as Dream Team 3. This was a group we actually got to witness, and with their overwhelming talent, they were able to comfortably secure the gold medal in Atlanta. The team wasn't perfect, as they had some issues with chemistry and minutes, but regardless, there was little doubt about them taking home the gold. The guards were Gary Payton, John Stockton, Penny Hardaway, Reggie Miller, and Mitch Richmond. The forwards were Grant Hill, Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, and Karl Malone, and possibly the most terrifying rotation of centers that the game has ever seen, with David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon, and a young Shaquille O'Neal. Other than Michael Jordan, there was basically nothing that this '96 team was lacking, as they had an array of shooters, great facilitators, elite rebounders, a lockdown defense on the perimeter, and some of the greatest rim protectors the game has ever seen. They also had a great blend of youth and experience. As far as the deepest USA team of all time, this group certainly has a case. Number 5. The 1968 team. When you go this far back into basketball history, some people want to argue that the quality of athlete wasn't as good then as it is now. But I must say, it's really hard to make that argument when you look at the names on this roster. At the guards are the lethal scorers Oscar Robertson and Dave Bing, along with Lenny Wilkins, Jerry West, Hal Greer, and John Havlicek. The forwards are Elgin Baylor, Connie Hawkins, Willis Reed, and Jerry Lucas. At center is the dominant Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. Which of those two you start is basically irrelevant. Almost all of the players on this roster were solid rebounders, and even with their overwhelming talent, they wouldn't have had any issues playing as a team, as almost all of these players were fantastic at getting great opportunities for their teammates, including Wilt Chamberlain, who was coming off a season where he just led all players in overall assists. Number 4. The 2012 team. This is another group that we were fortunate enough to witness, as this team displayed some of the greatest shooting and athleticism we've ever seen in Olympic basketball. The guards were Chris Paul, Deron Williams, and Russell Westbrook, alongside of Kobe Bryant and James Harden. The forwards were LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, Andre Iguodala, Anthony Davis, and Kevin Love. The only player who officially played full-time at the center position was Tyson Chandler. This was right around the time that the NBA was officially moving into the era of positionless basketball, as it wasn't uncommon for this group to run an undersized 5 on the court. But with nearly everyone being a threat from distance, there was little the defense could do to disrupt them. As I mentioned earlier, this group was especially athletic, and it makes sense considering how Kobe was the only player on this team who was above the age of 30. Number 3. The 2008 Redeem Team. The guards were Jason Kidd, Chris Paul, and Deron Williams, alongside of the MVP Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, and Michael Redd. The forwards were LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Tayshaun Prince, Chris Bosh, and Carlos Boozer. Holding down the center position was the young Dwight Howard. I tend to take a lot of heat for the somewhat unpopular opinion that the '08 team was better than the 2012 team. Yes, the 2008 team didn't have Kevin Durant, but they did have a Kobe Bryant who was actually in his prime, a prime Dwayne Wade who was arguably the best player during the Beijing Olympics, and they also had Jason Kidd, who was absolute magic on the court alongside of athletic finishers like LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. Dwight Howard was also the perfect center for this team, as he was dominant with his interior defense, and he was a great lob finisher for a team with so many playmakers. Tyson Chandler in 2012 is a decent option, but a young and athletically superior Dwight Howard was simply on another level. The team also had one key component that USA teams don't usually have: hunger, as they were determined to redeem themselves after the bronze medal in 2004. Under Kobe's leadership defensively, this group was hounding the opponent, especially on the perimeter, as the team displayed the kind of hustle and effort you would expect to see from an NBA Finals series. Number 2. The 1992 Dream Team. This team isn't just considered as the greatest basketball team ever, but many people consider them as the greatest team ever assembled in all of sports. The facilitating guards were Magic Johnson and John Stockton, complemented by the athletic scoring two guards Michael Jordan and Clyde the Glide Drexler. The forwards were Larry Bird, Scottie Pippen, Chris Mullin, Charles Barkley, and Karl Malone. Holding down the center position was the strong tandem of David Robinson and Patrick Ewing. And for the sake of this video, we're throwing in the near 30 points per game scorer Dominique Wilkins as a replacement for the college athlete Christian Laettner. What is there to say about this team that hasn't already been said? 11 Hall of Famers all competing to stand out amongst one another, dominating the likes of Angola and the rest of the world for that matter.
I don't know anything about Angola, but Angola's in trouble.
Throw in Dominique Wilkins and this team somehow becomes even more terrifying in transition than they already were. Number 1. The 1988 team. In my opinion, what would have been the greatest USA team on paper is the team that could have been just before the Dream Team showed up. The guards are Magic Johnson, John Stockton, Isaiah Thomas, Michael Jordan, and Clyde Drexler. The forwards are Larry Bird, Dominique Wilkins, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, and Kevin McHale. The centers are two men who basically ran the 80s down low, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Moses Malone. This group would have been very similar to the Dream Team, but the few differences are incredibly significant ones almost entirely in favor of the '88 team. Michael Jordan is coming off of his 1988 MVP and Defensive Player of the Year campaign, which is arguably the greatest season of all time from an individual standpoint. Unlike 1992, Magic Johnson just won his second straight championship and is still in the prime of his career. Larry Bird is still dominating as he was just coming off of his second straight 50-40-90 season while averaging 30 points per game, and he isn't dealing with the back issues to the extent that he was in 1992. With this USA team, he actually would have had a heavy load of minutes while playing some of his best basketball. Many of the players from the '92 team are here, but they're just faster and more athletic. Then you throw in guys like Kevin McHale, who's arguably the greatest in the post scorer of league history, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, whose skyhook isn't getting contested by anyone not named Wilt Chamberlain, and it's a wrap. This team would have had zero weaknesses. So what do you think? Which potential USA team would have been the strongest? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Today, I'm tackling a type of list that I haven't seen done yet on YouTube. I'm ranking the top 10 greatest players in the history of Olympic USA basketball. Now there are several factors at play. Although I will be considering the skills and talent of each player at the time they wore the US jersey, I will also be considering what they specifically accomplished while they were playing for Team USA, and their statistics during that time will significantly matter as well. For example, Allen Iverson is officially one of the 75 greatest NBA players of all time. But because he only participated in one Olympic event in the year 2004, he only won the bronze medal and he shot well below 40% during those Olympic Games, he will not be making this list, regardless of his talent and regardless of the fact that he was one of the best NBA players at the time. Hopefully, that all makes sense. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10. Patrick Ewing. This 7-foot center is a legend in New York. but he was pretty darn good on the global stage as well. Ewing won 2 gold medals with Team USA, one in 1984 and one in 1992. International centers didn't have much of an answer for him, as the bruising big was able to score with ease, just about every time he felt like it. Over his career in the Olympic Games, Patrick averaged 10.3 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks on a lethal 62.3% shooting. He may not have been the most dominating center on my list, but considering his legitimate impact for his country on multiple occasions, he's definitely worthy of being on my list. Number 9. Dwayne Wade. He doesn't have the most extensive career, as he only participated in 2004 and 2008, and he certainly got off to a rocky start in 2004, as he only averaged 7.3 points on 38% shooting, and the US finished those games in Greece with only a bronze medal. With that being said, he got his revenge in 2008, which is also the performance that earned his way onto this list. Many people focus on Kobe and LeBron's impact on the 2008 Redeem team, but in reality, Wade might have been the best player overall for those games, as he led all US players in scoring while shooting a whopping 67.1% from the field, which resulted in his lone gold medal. For his Olympic career, he averaged 11.6 points, 2.9 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and 2.2 steals on 54.4% shooting. It's also worth mentioning how he was extremely clutch down the stretch for that gold medal game, which makes me very comfortable placing him on this list despite the lack of volume. Number 8. Scottie Pippen. Whether it was NBA games or international games, Pippen was one of the greatest two-way players in the history of basketball. Throughout his Olympic career, Scottie won 2 gold medals, one in 1992 as a member of the Dream Team and another one in 1996. Not only was he an elite lockdown defender for Team USA, but he also embraced a role as a distributor on these extremely talented teams. His career Olympic averages were 10 points, 3 rebounds, 4.6 assists, and 2.3 steals on 55.1% shooting. Although he was able to coast as a scorer, of all the players on this list, Scottie has the highest assists per game average, and the second highest steals per game average, solidifying his spot on the list. Number 7. David Robinson. The Admiral was a consistent force for Team USA down low, as he won the gold medal twice in 1996 and 1992, and he won a bronze medal in 1988. Similarly to Scottie Pippen, Robinson was one of the strongest two-way players in the history of USA basketball, as he was a fierce rim protector. Over his career, he put up averages of 11.3 points, 5.2 rebounds, 1.1 steals, and 1.4 blocks on 60.8% shooting. Although many all-time great centers have worn the red, white, and blue, like Shaq, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Patrick Ewing, none of them consistently impacted the Olympic Games as strongly as Robinson did. Number 6. Charles Barkley. The round mound of rebound was incredible throughout his NBA career, but the crazy thing is, he stood out even more on the global stage, despite playing alongside of the best basketball players in the world. Chuck participated in 1992 and in 1996, and he won the gold medal in both of those instances. When people think about the Dream Team in 1992, 3 faces usually come to mind: Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird. But what many people fail to realize is that none of those guys were actually the most impressive player during those Barcelona Olympics. That was Charles Barkley. Sir Charles led US players in scoring, averaging 18 points per game on a ridiculous 71.1% shooting. He also shot a stupid 87.5% from three-point range, as Chuck was one of the guys who greatly benefited from a shorter three-point line in the international game. If I still haven't got the point across of how dominant he was in Barcelona, consider how this was his per 36 minutes stats. They're just straight up goofy. For his career on the global stage, he averaged 15.4 points, 5.3 rebounds, 2.4 assists, and 1.8 steals on 74.4% shooting, and a ridiculous 75% from three-point range. If he had participated in just one more Olympic event, then he likely would be in a top 3 spot on this list. thanks to his combination of his peak performance and consistency. But ultimately, due to a smaller sample size, he'll have to settle for 6th on the list. Number 5. LeBron James. Like his friend Dwayne Wade, LeBron's US career got off to a rocky start, as he only averaged 5 points in limited minutes in the 2004 games, and his team only walked away with a bronze medal. It was a completely different story after that though, as he helped the US dominate in 2008 and 2012, where they won the gold in both instances. Just like his career in the NBA, LeBron impacted the games in a multitude of ways, efficiently filling up the stat sheet across the board. Over his career, he averaged 11.4 points, 4 rebounds, 3.7 assists, and 1.5 steals on a stellar 60.1% shooting. Without his frequent impact in 2008 and 2012, the US may have not ended up winning those gold medals, which earns him a top 5 spot on my list. Number 4. Kobe Bryant. The Mamba only participated in 2 Olympic events, but his team did end up winning the gold medal on both occasions, and you really can't overstate Kobe's influence and leadership in winning those gold medals. After the disappointing bronze in 2004, the US specifically recruited Kobe for his veteran leadership and for his insatiable desire to win. For his career, he averaged 13.6 points, 2.3 rebounds, 1.7 assists, and 1.1 steals on 44.8% shooting. Offensively, you could definitely argue that several other players should be ahead of him on this list. But in that case, you would be ignoring Kobe's greatest contribution, which was on the defensive end. The Mamba accepted the assignment of consistently guarding the opposing best player, and his defensive effort and work ethic ended up being a massive inspiration to the team. I also have to mention how he clutchly closed out Spain in the gold medal game in 2008, with a series of monumental baskets, assists, and stops. I think I speak for everyone who watched that game, but the US likely doesn't win the gold that year without Kobe. Number 3. Carmelo Anthony. For Team USA, he may not have had a greater peak than say Kobe, LeBron, or Charles Barkley, but almost no one can say that they were as consistently deadly as Melo was over a long period of time for his country. He participated in 4 different Olympic events in 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016, and he won the gold medal in 3 out of those 4 instances, tying him for the most gold medals in US basketball history. He was consistently among the leading scorers throughout his long Olympic career, but more specifically, Melo was an absolute sniper from 3-point range. With a slightly shorter 3-point line, downtown was right in Melo's sweet spot. Throughout his career, he shot a tremendous volume of 139 3-pointers, and he made 41% of them. To this day, he is in 2nd place on the USA's all-time scoring list, with many of these shots coming in moments where his team needed them. Number 2. Michael Jordan. MJ represented the last group of collegiate stars to win the gold medal in the Olympics, which they did in 1984. 8 years later, in 1992, Jordan led the Dream Team to absolutely destroy all of the competition that stood in their path, as he finished his US career without ever losing a single game. For Team USA, MJ didn't waste any time establishing himself as the very best, as he even dominated NBA All-Stars with a group of college players in '84. Over his career, MJ averaged 16 points, 2.7 rebounds, 3.4 assists, and 2.8 steals on 45.1% shooting. His 2.8 steals average is the highest of any player on this list. Not only was he regularly the leading scorer, but he was an absolute menace on defense, especially as a member of the Dream Team. In the 1992 games in Barcelona, MJ averaged an absurd 4.1 steals in only 23 minutes per game. That puts his per 36 minute stat at a comically insane 6.4 steals per game. Whether it was in the NBA or overseas, it was nearly impossible to beat Michael Jordan when he was at his best. Number 1. Kevin Durant. When it comes to sustained American greatness on the Olympic level, it doesn't get any better than Kevin Durant. Kevin participated in the Olympics 3 separate times, and he won the gold medal each and every time. In all three instances, he was the team's leading scorer by far, as he's also the all-time leading scorer in US Olympic history, by quite the significant margin, I should add. Over his career in the Olympic Games, KD averaged 19.8 points, 5.4 rebounds, 3.2 assists, and 1.2 steals on 52.3% shooting. He also made 50% of his 148 three-point attempts, making him also the most lethal perimeter shooter that the US has ever had. If you need any more convincing, consider the fact that KD put the US on his back in 2020. And in the gold medal game where the US narrowly defeated France, Durant scored 29 of the United States' 87 points. Whether it's about winning the most, consistency, or statistics, by basically every metric, Kevin Durant is the greatest basketball player in US Olympic history. So what do you guys think? How does your list differ from mine? Let me know in the comments section below. Also, happy 4th to you and your family. Well, the FIBA Games just recently concluded, and no one is currently feeling more vindicated than world champion sprinter Noah Lyles. Germany took home the gold and now have full authorization to call themselves world champions, which they're doing quite a bit. On the other hand, Team USA finished the FIBA Games with a mediocre 5-3 record and didn't win a single medal, which I'm not gonna lie, is an embarrassment to our country, and as a lifelong American basketball fan, I'm still not over it. Well, now the United States is mad, and understandably, the best basketball players in the US are determined to redeem themselves and restore the red, white, and blue to the top of the basketball world. At the time I'm writing this script, many of the best NBA players have unofficially committed to representing the US in the 2024 Olympic Games. In a matter of minutes, people started calling this hypothetical USA team the Lavengers. And I gotta be honest, I'm hyped as heck to see it. Although I was frustrated by the lack of superstar turnout for the USA team in the FIBA competition, I am rather pleased to see that so many of our USA players have enough pride that they'll sacrifice their summer of relaxation time to put the US back on the mountaintop. Now, as an older basketball fan, I gotta say, I love seeing so many young basketball fans on social media getting excited and being filled with American pride for the response to these FIBA games. But here's the funny part that many people seem to be missing. This is nothing new for USA basketball. This is literally history repeating itself, as this has become a main theme of our country when it comes to the international competition. Let me explain with a bit of a history lesson. The Basketball Olympics officially began in 1936, and from that point until 1968, the US won the gold medal in all 7 Olympic events between those years. Simply put, the US had an absolute stranglehold on the game of basketball for nearly 4 decades. As time went on, the rest of the world continued to improve, and although the US was still usually the gold medal winners, they no longer looked untouchable when compared to the rest of the competition. And then, in the 1988 Olympics, the US received a wake-up call, as the Soviet Union defeated the United States in the gold medal game, and this was officially the beginning of the historical trend for USA basketball. The American competition was infuriated by the loss, to such an extent that they completely changed their approach to Olympic basketball. Up until that bronze medal in 1988, the US had never let their NBA players participate in the Olympic Games, but instead, they were being represented by the best collegiate players in the country. Well, all of that quickly changed as the US was determined to send a message to the world and assembled the 1992 Dream Team for the Barcelona Games. You guys know how this went. The Dream Team completely destroyed the competition, going undefeated in Barcelona and winning by an average of roughly 44 points per game. The US won the Olympic gold in 1996 and then won it again in the year 2000. But by that point, it was clear that the American NBA players were starting to get complacent, as the talent on the 2000 team wasn't quite as stacked as the previous 96 and 92 teams. By 2004, their arrogance had caught up to them, as they only went 5-3 in Athens, Greece, finishing those Olympic Games with an embarrassing bronze medal. And once again, the US competitors were angry and decided to start taking things seriously once again. In 2008, they had assembled the Redeem Team, famously led by the recently recruited Kobe Bryant, who was participating in Olympic competition for the first time in his basketball career. Although they executed their vengeance in Beijing by winning the gold medal, they didn't quite dominate the competition to the same extent that they did in 1992, which once again provided more evidence that the gap was closing between the US and the rest of the world. The US won the gold in 2012 and in 2016, but again, it was evident that the sense of urgency was wearing off and complacency was setting in, as the 2016 team wasn't nearly as stacked as the 12 and 08 squads. Although the US won the gold in 2020, they also haven't won a FIBA Games tournament since 2014. And after this most recent failure to finish on the podium, the American NBA players have apparently had enough, as we are once again responding with the A team, with vengeance on the mind. On one hand, it's very exciting to see the cycle repeating itself as the US Super Team is assembling once again. But it's also quite frustrating because we have to be knocked off the mountaintop in order for us to take international play serious enough to bust out the A team. I fully expect this cycle to continue where the US dominates, then gets complacent, they lose as a result, then they get angry, and then the cycle starts over again. But what I'm worried about is that this cycle won't continue forever. With the names who are unofficially committed to competing in 2024, I have a very hard time not seeing the US win the gold in the 2024 Olympics. But the day is coming, whether it's 10 years from now or 20 years from now, where the US gets angry at the previous defeat and responds with their team of vengeance, and even that team fails. When that day comes, it will certainly be a humbling day for United States basketball, and maybe that will be the kind of drastic event that it takes for the cycle to officially be broken. I love my country, and I firmly believe that at full strength, we're better than any other country at the game of basketball. But remember, the US was pretty much at full strength in 2008, and that gold medal game went down to the wire, regardless of the fact that the US was led by all-time greats like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and Dwayne Wade. And just how much has the rest of the world improved in the last 15 years? Again, we gotta stop taking the international competition for granted, because all of these assumptions that will come out victorious as long as we're serious is eventually gonna backfire. With that being said, I doubt it will be in 2024, because this hypothetical team is absolutely stacked, and not just from the perspective of talent alone. But I actually love the way the playstyles complement one another, as KD can blend in with just about any roster, and LeBron finding Steph wide open on the perimeter is basically a match made in heaven. With LeBron operating as the floor general, and with an array of shooters like Steph, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker, they will be absolutely raining threes on the opposing countries at an extremely efficient rate. And then, with interior defenders like Anthony Davis, Bam Adebayo, there will be basically zero easy baskets in the painted area for the rest of the world. Then you even have to factor in the player progression for the younger stars on the squad, as Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards will likely be even better by the time these Olympic Games roll around. There should also be a high level of chemistry with this group, as there is a lot of familiarity between all the different teammates. If these quote Levengers assemble as expected, then this will be the first USA team since 2012 that can at least somewhat match up to the level of talent of the original Dream Team. But now, I'm starting to get ahead of myself. Now I want to hear your perspective on things. Would this hypothetical USA team be strong enough to challenge the 2008 Redeem Team or the 1992 Dream Team? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. I can't believe I'm making a video about this. Honestly, I think this is one of the dumbest and inconsequential conversations we've had in sports in a long time. Regardless, many people have been asking me in the comments and on my social media pages for my opinion on the matter. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, let me quickly get you up to speed. Noah Lyles is a professional sprinter for the US who is now currently the fastest man in the world. Nobody has broken Usain Bolt's legendary records from 13 years ago. But as for the athletes who are currently competing, Noah is the best of the best. Recently, he won the gold medal and was crowned as world champion. But that's not the reason why everyone is talking about him in basketball circles. In a press conference, Noah shares some seemingly random thoughts on another sports league. Take a listen.
You know, the thing that hurts me the most is that I have to watch the NBA Finals and they have world champion on their head. World champion of what? The United States? Don't get me wrong. I love the U.S. at times, but that ain't the world. That is not the world. We are the world. We have almost every country out here fighting, thriving, putting on their flag to show that they are represented. There ain't no flags in the NBA.
Some people are hating on Noah for even saying this, and some people love him for it. Regardless on your opinion of his statement, he might just be a genius who is playing 4D chess, because his statement brought tons of attention to the world of track and field, and he's now a name and face that many people are aware of. And they likely would have never had a clue he even existed if he never made these comments. Now here's the thing, these comments from Noah basically started the goofiest war of semantics on the internet. A lot of NBA players took offense to his comments, while some foreigners could see where he was coming from and appreciated his comments. Now first and foremost, I freaking love my country, and yes, I do believe it's the greatest country in the world, and anyone that wants to fight me on that can stick it. Hoorah! But with that being said, I'm not the most arrogant American ever, who tells everyone in every single topic that it's my way or the highway. If I'm in a conversation with some foreigners and they want to refer to the specific game on screen as football, then I'm not going to get on my high horse and quote correct them by calling it soccer. In nearly everywhere else in the world, people refer to it as football. So I can then refer to our version of football as American football or as the NFL, as a way of showing them respect. Like I said, I love my country and I'm a proud American. But I'm also not looking to convince the rest of the world that we're the best in the world at everything that's ever happened in all of human history, like some Americans do. Part of me feels like this aspect is an underlying driving force in this argument. Some Americans want to take the highest level of credit possible by calling it world champions, while foreigners are annoyed by the American elitism and prefer a more humble approach. Now there's two sides to the argument that both make sense. On one hand, you have the argument in favor of the world champion tag. More than ever before, the NBA is seen as a global brand, as the best players in the world have come together to compete in the United States. Therefore, the argument is that if the world's best players are represented in this league, then the champion would naturally be the champions of the world. There's also the angle that no other country's team could beat the Denver Nuggets. Thus, they stand alone at the top of the world. Although I think that is a safe assumption, that is still an assumption. Now on the other hand, there are those who don't think it should be called world champions, because teams are not representing their countries, but rather US cities. In the NBA, Giannis is not playing for Greece, he's playing for Milwaukee. Luka Doncic is not playing for Slovenia, he's playing for Dallas. And Nikola Jokic is not playing for Serbia, he's playing for Denver. Americans taking credit as world champions when a literal Serbian is the finals MVP seems a little arrogant and ridiculous to many foreigners. I think this whole conversation is kinda dumb, and there's certainly more interesting topics to discuss within the world of basketball. But if you really want to know where I stand on the matter, I do agree with Noah Lyles, in the sense that calling NBA champions world champions is a little ridiculous. I think his delivery is a little weird, him bringing it up is incredibly random, and him claiming that it quote hurts him is a little melodramatic to say the least. Have a Flintstones vitamin and cheer up, Buttercup. I think you'll be just fine. Regardless of the somewhat cringy delivery, the man's got a point, as I've always thought it was weird when people refer to the NBA champions as world champions. I mean, for goodness sake, the league itself is called the National Basketball Association. National, as in the nation, meaning the United States of America, not the world. Until you change the name of the league altogether, it's a losing argument, because the answer to the debate is literally built into the name of the league itself. Now sure, you could make the point that the best team in the world is in the NBA, but that's subject to change. The NBA owns their league, but they don't own the game of basketball as a whole. It's not like they have an exclusive patent on all forms of quality basketball. And what this means is that other leagues can rise up and compete against the NBA. If there ever comes a point where a foreign country has a league that's competitive to the NBA, do we then stop calling NBA winners world champions? Or does it remain that way because that's the way it's always been? It's shaky ground, and giving an NBA team that title is something that might make sense in the moment, but that likely won't always be the case, especially when you consider how quickly the rest of the world is rapidly improving in the sport. The funny thing is that we already have a format where different countries compete against one another for the title of the best in the world. It's not this league, but this one. The FIBA Games and the Olympic Games meet all of the qualifications for a team to be honored as world champions, where players are actually representing their countries. What's even funnier is that the US is already the defending champions of the World Games, at least in terms of the Olympics. So it's hilarious to see so many Americans arguing that the NBA champs should be considered as world champs, when the US is already world champs in a league where countries actually compete. No matter how you slice it, the most impressive accomplishment in the game of basketball is without question the NBA championship. It doesn't have to be seen as a global accomplishment for it to be recognized as the pinnacle of basketball achievements. With that being said, I wouldn't say it's the league that determines the world champions. We already have that. It's simply the league that determines the NBA champions, which means way more in the grand scheme of basketball history anyway. Now you might look at this video and say to yourself, who cares what some dumb YouTuber says compared to what the NBA players say? But the thing is, several legendary basketball minds have agreed with my conclusion. One of those was the all-time great head coach, Greg Popovich. Back in 2010, Coach Pop said this: "There are no world champions in the NBA, so anybody that has a flag up that says world champions is not correct. It's not appropriate. The world champions, I believe, are the Spanish team right now. USA is the Olympic champion. The Lakers are the NBA champion. It doesn't make sense for an NBA team to call themselves world champions. I don't remember anybody playing outside of our borders to get that tag. There's a team in Canada, that's true, but the world's bigger than North America." Recently, Shaquille O'Neal echoed the thoughts of Greg Popovich, which means a lot coming from a man who had 4 championships of his own. At the end of the day, this is truly the corniest, goofiest, and the most unnecessarily heated basketball debates that I've ever seen. I kinda just want to get a good idea on where the majority of my audience stands. So let me know in the comments below, are you on Team World Champions or Team NBA Champions? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.